welcome to Celebrate Southern Africa. It's the book festival, which is across the month of November. And I am chatting to some of our most hugely talented, I just made a new phrase, some of our most talented writers, but also I'm chatting to writers and authors who have written about Southern Africa, whether they are born there or not. The fact is that they are very drawn to our corner of the world. Now, today I have a very special guest. It's a first for me because I'm interviewing family. This mate Willem. Hello, Willem. How are you?
Hello, Dawn, and hello, everybody.
It's so good to chat to you. So you're in Cape Town. You're in Somerset West in the Cape, and I am in East Somerset in the UK.
Wow. Okay. We've got the Somerset in common.
Absolutely, along with a load of DNA. But I wanted to chat to you today about your writing because I have been inspired by you since I was a child, because I've always known, even when I was very little, about your talents. And you have always been, in my mind, a writer. Like I know you were a teacher, but I think most of what I can recall is you being a writer. So, Willem, was the family very artistic? Like, were they very connected to culture when you were growing up, or were you kind of the special one?
Well, this is a very interesting question for me because I wasn't particularly encouraged to do any writing as a child. The only people who encouraged me were my teachers. The teachers said, "Wow." My parents used to say, "Oh dear, he's busy with this little story thing again," you know, and they were vaguely embarrassed by that. And my teachers were the ones. I got recognition in primary school, and I got recognition in high school, and it was very nice. And I used to get 8 out of 10 for my writing, you know, and I was so taken with that. And it just increased. So by the time I reached university, I had the rather strange advice from one of our lecturers. He looked at us, and on the very first day he said to us, "If there are any of you that want to be writers, you should get up and leave this room and this university now, because university is only going to kill your drive to writing." And I thought to myself, well, I mean, it's an interesting thought. I'm not going to follow up on that one. And with the result that I didn't leave university, and it was wonderful, and it was an education to me. And
do you think you were inspired to be a teacher because of the inspiration that your teachers gave you?
I used to sit in class and think to myself, you know, I wouldn't teach like that. You know, you're not teaching it very well. I would do it differently. And then I thought, well, become a teacher and go and do it differently. And I did. And I can tell you that not many of my principals, they used to look askance at me and think, this guy's a bit off the wall, you know. And I was.
And you still are.
Thank you. Thank you for that compliment. My life is really fulfilled by hearing that.
Well, as a creative, you don't want to hear that you are mainstream or that you are, you know, of the norm, because that's where creativity happens.
No, I didn't want to do. I remember once a student said to me, you know, my teacher said that when I write an interior monologue, I mustn't use the word I so much. So I said, if you're writing an interior monologue, you have to use the word I, and I'm teaching you not as a teacher, I'm teaching you as a writer. They didn't quite understand that.
Yeah. So you've written a range of different different genres. They're all creative writing, but I am really quite inspired by the fact that you write in English and in Afrikaans, because you know there are few writers who can do that. But you did grow up in a bilingual household, and maybe has that had an impact on the fact that you still write Afrikaans?
No, in fact. My Afrikaans, I was anglicized from beginning, from day one in schools. I went to English schools, and that has a profound effect on anybody. And then I'm going to tell a short story here. I sat in a Spanish pub in Barcelona looking at Spanish people drinking Spanish wine, talking Spanish and laughing in Spanish. And I thought, who the hell am I? And my search for my roots and my identity started in that pub in Barcelona. And I came back and I was searching and I began to write in Afrikaans as well. I didn't do anything serious, but I was interested. And also what was happening in Afrikaans. Afrikaans has been remarkable in that it's gone through a kind of revolution in the 1960s, and that revolution has been continued. And people are doing remarkable things. People in New Zealand, there was a man who won a prize, a very sad book, I might say, wrote from New Zealand, and won a prize for his Afrikaans in New Zealand. And I thought, wow, that's amazing, you know. So it's, and Afrikaans is, for me, it feels more open in a sense than English is. English is half a dozen languages, half a dozen countries with English as a language, main language, and you know, it's crowded. It's very crowded. Afrikaans feels like the Karoo to me. It feels open and ready. Wow. So that's why I write in Afrikaans too.
And do you think there's still a real desire for Afrikaans literature?
I must tell you that there are at least 3 magazines that I've written for. I've written Afrikaans stories for these people, and I discovered that there were almost no magazines in South Africa that still publish short stories. All the women's magazines in English don't publish stories anymore. And yeah, it's interesting that Afrikaans-speaking people are reading far more. Well, on the surface, certainly in terms of from a publishing point of view, are reading more Afrikaans than in English. It may be that people are buying books from English or reading in the library and so on. But that seems to be the situation in South Africa. They are at the moment, I believe that they are publishing at least 40 Mills and Boon type novels in Afrikaans, for which I've tried to write. But if you think about that, that's a publisher's dream, that you are publishing 40 books per month in South Africa in Afrikaans.
Wow.
There are 13 million people who speak Afrikaans at home. And that's changing. That's gradually English is infiltrating and getting. It's not a bad thing, but it's quite sad for Afrikaans itself.
I think that, well, language evolves anyway, but I do think that maybe the role of writers such as you know, writers that write in an Afrikaans play a role maybe in keeping it alive.
Yeah, and I mean, you go and look at even though publishing is becoming more difficult, if you go and look in the bookshops, it's packed out with Afrikaans books. The English is there too, but it's not exciting. It's not. But Afrikaans are writing about all kinds of things. It's almost as if after 1994, the political change, that Afrikaans was suddenly free to run, and that's exciting.
Very exciting.
I'm just also interested in the world of Afrikaans lyric writing.
I was going to ask you about that, because you really enjoy the marrying of music with the words, and specifically in a blues genre. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I've actually got 2 books here. This is Marvy. I don't know if you can see it. It's probably backwards. It's backwards for me, but you may see it straight. This is one of the 2 books that I've got. These are full of Afrikaans blues lyrics. People say to me, are you trying to be American? And then I say, I'm sorry, but you don't know the history of the Cape Town harbor. In the 1860s, the freed slaves from New Orleans went from port to port to port. I'm talking now about Venezuela, Rio de Janeiro, Buenos Aires and Cape Town. And in each of these, they left a festival. They brought the Mardi Gras from New Orleans. And if you look at our, what they call the Klopse in Cape Town, you see the Mardi Gras from New Orleans. But that wasn't all they left here. They left the blues lyrical form. And we have poetry in the blues lyrical form, which became part of Afrikaans. Poet like Boerneef, N.P. van Wyk Louw, and later Ronnie Belcher, built out this blues form, but they didn't call it the blues, but that's exactly what it was. So I've come along and I've actually called it the blues, and I would like at some point, if I still can do that, is to perform them, and to not so much in singing, because I don't do that as well, but more speak blues, and to play on the piano and to speak the blues. And yeah, they're actually very interesting. And the range of emotion in those blues range from sacred right to obscene.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the topics of life, really. So every aspect of life.
Yeah, topics of life, you know. So that's what I do, and I love to. The performance side I'm working on, and that may still happen. And you know, I'm famous, but nobody knows it.
You're famous in my books, Willem, definitely.
Thank you.
One of your most popular books that I know that you sell on Amazon is How to Play the Sand. So tell us a bit about that, and what is playing the sand?
Very briefly, I've in the 1980s, I was in healing communities, and I've been in those healing communities for some time, even as recently as 15 years ago. And in these healing communities, I discovered the sand tray. Now, what it is, it's a big sand tray, and it's got sea sand in it, and then you've got 200 or 300 objects, and you go and select objects that call you. That's how we speak about it. And then you play in the sand. And it sounds very childish to do this, but it's actually got a psychological history from the 1920s. So for the past 100 years, the sand has been used to do projection psychology. And anyone who plays in it becomes very uneasy because they realize how much of this is actually revealing what's going on inside of them. And so I do it for self-knowledge. I don't do therapeutics because the Jungian psychologists will lynch me. So I say I do this for self-knowledge. And there's a possibility of taking that now to people who work with dementia patients. Wow. And to try and help them with the sand. Let them play in the sand and try and stimulate their memory, as opposed to verbal. You say something to them and you try and get them to remember that tomorrow. That's verbal. But when you play in the sand, it's an object that you move, and you are also drawing on your earliest childhood enjoyment that you do.
Yeah,
so it's amazing. It's
and really powerful, incredibly powerful.
And I've written this book about it, if people are interested in looking at that.
Yeah, no, fantastic. One of the books that I really love that you've written is Stories for Healing. And you've already mentioned that you were, involved in a very big healing community. But tell me a little bit.
This is the book that you're referring to. I've also got this in Afrikaans, but I haven't published it in Afrikaans.
Striking. Those stories are striking, and anybody who has who doesn't even think that they might have an issue around a certain topic can relate to the stories in a different way, which is incredibly clever of you. But then we're family and we're both clever.
I was asked by a woman at a rehabilitation center. She said, "Please give me this." So I went away. Took me 6 months. Returned. She had changed jobs, and that people weren't interested again. So I was saddled with this. But it's very nice. They are allegories, and they've got questions. Questions, and for teachers. The teachers can use them in a teaching situation. And counselors can use them in a counseling situation. And I am mad about fairy tales. I've read, African Grimm's fairy tales, Indian, the 1001 Nights. And I've read Bettelheim's absolutely amazing book called Uses of Enchantment. and he explicates what fairy tales actually mean. So I'm fascinated by that, and I've made my attempt in that book, Stories for Healing, to do that.
No, it's
So,
brilliant. I love it. And one day someone will will ramble off the lists of all the famous, like, Grimm story tales, Van der Walt story tales.
put my
Fairy
name
tales.
up with Hans Christian Andersen. Yeah,
Um,
Hans and I.
You know, you were saying, I know that you're an avid reader, but you're also a short story writer. And I kind of wonder if you read a lot, does that impact on your short stories?
All reading impacts on all writing, you know. I haven't read that much fiction in the last year. I've read quite philosophy. I try and tell myself that I've still got the mind young enough to absorb all of these incredibly highfalutin ideas, you know. Here and there, some ideas actually stick, you know, the idea on page 103. That idea, that one stuck.
Don't remember what it was, but it stuck.
And then I've also been reading. I've also been reading a lot of fairy tales, and yeah, for the first time I read Arms. What is it? Farewell to Arms, Ernest Hemingway, and I must say I was rather disappointed. It's a famous book, and his whole you know, reputation rests on that particular book. But I thought to myself, you know, I didn't work for me. And I suppose you shouldn't. What you shouldn't do is first read Virginia Woolf and then read Hemingway. That you mustn't do, because you're going to find two different worlds. But
yeah, I wonder if those books were, though, that sat in a very specific period, and at that time probably, and we subsequently, that writer has a history with us, like we now know who they are, and maybe that has an impact on how we read their book.
You say that's so interesting. Both of those books were published in 1928. To the Lighthouse and Virginia Woolf, To the Lighthouse, and To the Lighthouse it's the opposite of what Hemingway does.
Yeah,
and I found it remarkable, but I'm not sure that I would actually tackle that. I move closer to his type of writing, you know, the minimalist. You know,
because talking about minimalist writing, you've written a book 50 by 50, which is 50 stories, and each story is only told in 50 words.
50 words, yeah. I'm fascinated by that, but nobody else seems to be, except you. Anyway, we'll form a duo, you know.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think there's something quite special in how you choose your words, because the words create the journey, not only of the story that you're trying to tell, but the journey of the reader. And at the end of the 50 words, I often find myself going, wow, like I have to stop and think, because there's so much in those 50 words. It's how you've selected them and the order in which you selected them, which is remarkable.
Let me read a flash saga on the nature of what is a flash saga. The flash saga is a maverick, a fugitive amongst forms, but when the light breaks, the face is clear. The intrigue of a short story, the seed of a novel, the taste of poetry, the pimento of haiku, they are in the flash saga. There, I think that should be 50. So I put in the last sentence so that it would just make up the 50 words. And then one of my favorites, I'll just share this one with you.
Please do.
Ants. Ants came. She sprayed insecticide. 30 days, no ants. Again they came as if nothing had happened. She crusaded. Again, no ants. Then the sky changed. The land grew hard. People cried to heaven. The earth yellowed and humanity disappeared. Silence grew. The ants came as if nothing had happened.
Wow. I love those.
They've got a, as I say, you know, it's a seed of a longer story. but they've got a bit of guts, I think.
But they've got the story in themselves too. If you want, they're standalone stories.
Well, yeah, you can, one can debate, you know, around that, but it's an interesting genre.
It's very interesting. So it's called flash sagas, and is
flash
there
sagas,
yeah. So flash sagas, how many words maximum would a flash saga be?
Well, you know, I've had some of these translated into French, and the French couldn't maintain the 50. There had to be more.
They're not big on rules.
De la this and de la that, and so your French words increase. But I thought, leave it, as long as it's very short.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
In Afrikaans works well. I've translated them all into Afrikaans as well, and that you keep at 50. And the 50 words.
You could call the French one 50 stories in 50-ish words.
Ish. I'm not sure that the French have reached the word ish yet.
Oh, that would be funny.
They were published in a magazine, in a political journal, and quite a number. I read about 10 of them were published. Never got any money for it, but okay.
This is the story of a writer. Willem, so short stories are your thing, and I know that you are really quite passionate about the short story kind of format. What is the secret to writing a short story?
I'm not sure whether there is a secret. I think there are as many short story writers as there are writers. You know, I'm quite traditional. When I do my creative writing courses, I tell people, look, I'm very traditional. There are three things. There's character, there's plot, and there's atmosphere setting. And you've got to look at those three in order to get that. And it's so interesting to see how great writers, I was just looking at Somerset West the other day, how it would be difficult to teach those three things by using his stories, because his stories are so character, they are complete, and the surrounding is quite fascinating. I mean, it's Malaysia, you know, and exotic places like that, and yet his characters are, they're 99% of the writing, and they're brilliant. I mean, they're absolutely amazing and great creation. I believe that he actually lived in the French Riviera for most of his life. I didn't actually know that, but I discovered that. So he, you know, the short story are those three things, but it's all situation. You're struck as a writer, you know, something happens, and you're struck as a writer by just a little phrase you hear, a little situation, and so that comes to you. One of my favorite, I'm moving off from the flash sagas now and the short stories. One of my favorite stories to tell about what I've done is that when I was 12 years old, the Russians sent a man up into space in 1961. Yuri Gagarin. There was the newspaper, you know, and full of Gagarin from beginning to end. And right at the end of that, right in the corner, there was a little article the size of a matchbox. And in it said, rumors in Moscow. It is rumored in Moscow that a man went up before Yuri Gagarin went, and he returned to Earth suffering from emotional disturbances. And I thought, who is that man? And where is he? And why did he go mad up there? Why? That was 1961. In 1988, I actually broadcast my radio play called The Edge of Silence about that very story. Of course, it wasn't about the first man in space. It was actually about me and my ex-wife. And this is an interesting story for people to hear, is how inspiration comes to you. And I was talking to the person that I'm teaching at the moment in creative writing, and I said to her, look, I'm talking a lot about myself. She says, your inspiration is an inspiration to me. Tell me about every story that you've written and tell me your inspiration for that. And it's fascinating how that little article, my Lost Boys, the book that has done very well for me, was also a little matchbox size article in a newspaper about a young boarder. He was at varsity, and the people that he was lodging with suddenly left, but they conveniently left their baby behind. And so he was stuck with this baby. And I thought, there's a story.
Yeah.
So I turned it into a play. It was a musical, which went to Grahamstown. And I wrote, straight after that, I wrote the novel in about 3 weeks, which was also a kind of record for me. I went to Oxford University Press, which was, I thought, oh, this is too posh for me. 7 days. Now, you won't hear other writers saying this. 7 days it took them to decide about that novel. They published it in 1898, and they have reprinted it now because it is demand.
Wow.
So I'm just from a little article in a newspaper, all of that has come.
That's amazing. That's amazing. But now your playwriting, I mean, there's a play that you wrote in the 1980s called Animals that really resonates in a modern world. Tell us a bit about Animals.
Well, Animals is of course Animal Farm. It's George Orwell's Animal Farm. I was fascinated by it as a student in high school. And I wrote this Animal Farm, and it's been performed by about 10 or 11 schools in South Africa. And we've had the school that I was at, I performed it there for the first time, and then 10 years later it was redone, and I actually went to that. It's quite interesting to see how someone else would do your own play. But yeah, Animals was great, and I was always hoping that it would kind of strike it lucky overseas, but these things don't happen. I mean,
well, these things may happen, but when you least expect them, I think is the way that things happen.
Yeah,
I was going to say,
it's always full of surprises.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So, what are you currently working on that we can share with people? Like, are you writing?
Mainly my performance of the blues that I want to perform, play and blues. I'm good at playing, but to actually put words to the playing, that's taking something from me. So I'm working a bit on that. And I draw a lot. I've got several thousand drawings of mine. I'm not an artist, but I really have a need to draw. And so I'm drawing quite a lot. And when I can afford another graphics program, then I'll start my photographics again. I take pictures and I show them to people, especially also now I'm trying to sell online resources to online teachers.
Because of course you taught English in South Korea, which was an incredible experience. And tell us a bit about how that came about and what you took away from your experience in South Korea.
Well, it was just the discovery of Korea. Now, I suppose most Western people would think of China and Korea and even Japan. Not Japan less so perhaps, but you think of people with lantern hats, these sort of triangular hats and working in rice fields and so on. Boy, did my experience of Korea shake me up. I arrived there and saw the city of Seoul with the most fantastic, really, truly of fantasy nature, high-rise buildings. And here were these people, 53, there were as many people living in that small little place as there are South Africans, or the whole of South Africa's population. And they're living in a tiny space. And it was an absolute revolution in my mind and an opening up of old prejudices. And they were utterly modern and they were utterly traditional. I went to temples. I actually spent 3 days in a temple, which was a remarkable experience for me. And I wrote songs for the kids that I was teaching. And then we used to do these songs. For instance, Yi Shun was a great historical hero of theirs. And I wrote Yi Shun, and then we're singing away in English, because that's what they want to learn, all about Yi Shun. Kids were quite fascinated, you know. And then I even taught them the English months by letting them do January, February, March, April, May, which is an old Western Cape song. And there they were jolling along and enjoying it, you know. Of course, my partner left early. She went back because her daughter was very sick. And I stayed on and restored my faith. His faith in me was restored by my staying on. And I have to admit that those 2 months were probably the most profound cultural explorations of my entire life. Each week I went to some part and explored. It was profound. It was really incredible. And so South Korea is a landmark in my life, you know.
And your writing, you're still sharing quite a lot on your blogs, and so it has had an impact on your writing, which is, I suppose, a reflection of life experience and the impact it can have on our lives, even if it feels like it's very far in the distance. Some of those are really quite impactful.
Yeah, I've written a lot about that on my travel blogs, both in English and Afrikaans. And so I've got 4 blogs. I used to have 5. The one kind of frizzled away, and it's interesting always to say why. But the 2 travel blogs are heavily, you know, populated with things from South Korea.
That's,
you know,
fantastic.
from the temples to the modern buildings to their poetry. Not that I could read Hangul, their language, but the translations of those poetry, wonderful, stunning stuff. And of course their history and their situation. You know, they live on the edge. At any moment, this crazy in North Korea could shoot a bomb into them. You know, and who knows whether he has enough humanity in him to stop doing that. You know, who knows?
I
mean, the West is really teaching us how to lose our humanity in the shape of Mr. Putin, I'm afraid. And he could do so much more for Russia than killing people in other countries. So Korea was wonderful. Right? It was really an experience for me. And I have many photographs. I must have taken 5,000-6,000 photographs in that time.
Fantastic. And Willem, before we go, behind you, you have a picture on the wall. Would you like to explain that picture?
This picture here, this is a crib from René Magritte, the Belgian surrealist painter. If you look in the top, for me, it's different. As you've said to me, it's switched around in order. But in the top, it would be, what's it?
No, top left.
The top left-hand corner. This is a shot taken for me when I was exploring a town or a part of Seoul, and I came across this particular area. They actually had a time capsule in it. Very interesting. The top right-hand corner has me sitting on a rock. And then I duplicated the same rock without me for 3. And that's René Magritte, the surrealist, did a wonderful painting of a figure sitting in a room, and then 3 pictures without him. When I saw this in the Tate Gallery, it affected me deeply. And now I've done it with myself. There I am.
There you are.
And it's not, if you think about it, it's quite a serious set of figures.
Yeah. No, I love it. It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah. I also do things like that. I've got art all over the house. I actually, for this interview, I took I call it my rude painting. It's a painting of a nude, which I took off the wall. I thought people may be shocked. It's a very beautiful painting, and of course it's not realistic. It's more expressionist. But yeah, maybe if we have another interview, I'll keep it on the wall, and then people can see what rude paintings I have. But other than that, my house is full of things that I've made. All my pictures that I've got, apart from the pictures of Claudie that I have here. Yeah.
So I wanted to, how do people get hold of you? Your email address, and you're on Facebook, Willem van der Walt Writer, so people can contact you through that.
Yeah, so Willem van der Walt Writer is on Facebook. Willem van der Walt Writer, or Will van, I think it's
Will van der Walt, that's right.
Will van der Walt Writer on Facebook. That would be a way in. Other than that, I'm on gmail.com. Okay, so if you keep that side, and then my Gmail is bluewill7.
We'll put that in the show notes. That's easy enough to do.
And people can contact me, and I would really love to do be a creative writing facilitator to anybody who's interested on Zoom. If I can just get the last final points from yourself, and
I'll teach you. That's no problem at all.
Great. Perhaps we can do it on Zoom, or shall we do the Zoom training on Skype?
Yeah, exactly. Willem, it's been a real pleasure to chat to you, and I am so thrilled that you got to share some of your stories. And I will put in the show notes all your links to your books and your Amazon links, and then also some of your South African publications, so that you can so that people, if they're interested, can explore. And yeah, get in touch with Willem if you would like to find out more about creative writing. And he can deliver some sessions on Zoom, so wherever you are in the world, or just work out the time zone. And
you can also do that with Margaret Atwood, who's a great writer, but I can promise you she won't discuss the fourth word of the second line in your poem with you. I can promise you that. She's just too busy.
She's a very busy lady.
She's a very busy lady. So it helps to get the amateurs, the sort of rising amateurs, get them there, because they discuss that second word in the fourth line. They'll go into an obsession about that second word.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much, Willem. And I will chat to you, no doubt, very soon.